Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Glass exploded against the mahogany doorframe, sending shards of crystal raining down like lethal confetti, narrowly missing Julian's cheek. He didn't flinch, while the three nannies behind him scrambled backward, clutching their pearls and gasping in horror. Julian merely adjusted his glasses and stepped over the debris. The air in the penthouse corridor was thick, suffocatingly heavy with the scent of distress, bitter almond, and ozone, radiating from the small, trembling figure curled in the corner of the room. This wasn't a temper tantrum. It was a biological imperative, a pheromone storm violent enough to bring grown alphas to their knees. But Julian wasn't a standard omega, and he certainly wasn't there to offer warm milk and cookies. He was there because he was drowning in debt, hiding a secret that was currently growing inside him, and he had run out of options. "Get out!" The scream tore from the throat of the boy, Leo, a 5-year-old with eyes like bruised storm clouds. "No," Julian said softly, his voice cutting through the chaos not with volume, but with a terrifying calm. He released his own scent, not the cloying sweetness typical of omegas, but the crisp, cool aroma of petrichor and wild mint. "I don't think I will." From the shadows of the doorway, a man watched. Dominic Vane, the CEO of Vane Enterprises, stood like a statue carved from obsidian. He was an alpha prime, a man who could crash stock markets with a frown, yet he looked at his son with a helplessness that bordered on despair. He had fired 12 nannies in 2 months. He expected Julian to run. He wanted him to run, because if he stayed, Dominic would have to investigate him, and Dominic destroyed everything he investigated. But Julian didn't run. He sat on the floor, amidst the broken glass, and waited. Chapter 1. The Monster in the Penthouse. The Vane estate was less a home and more a fortress of solitude suspended 50 stories above the city. It was a cold masterpiece of steel, glass, and modern art, devoid of warmth, a perfect reflection of its master. Dominic Vane was known in the business world as the Viper. He was ruthless, calculating, and rumor had it, utterly heartless. But rumors often missed the tragedy buried beneath the ice. 2 years ago, a rival syndicate had attempted a kidnapping. They failed to take Leo, but the trauma of the event and the violent loss of his mother in the crossfire had fractured the boy's mind. His biology had reacted by developing early-onset pheromone volatility. When Leo panicked, he emitted a distress signal so potent it induced nausea and aggression in nearby alphas. Except for Dominic. It only broke Dominic's heart. Julian knew the file. He had memorized it on the bus ride over, hand protectively covering his flat stomach. He needed this job. The salary Dominic offered was astronomical, enough to pay off his father's gambling debts and afford the specialized medical care Julian's unborn child would need. "He will bite you," Dominic said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. He stepped into the room, his expensive Italian loafers crunching on the glass. Julian didn't look up at the billionaire. He kept his eyes on Leo, who had stopped screaming and was now watching Julian with wary, tear-filled eyes. "I've been bitten by worse things than a child, Mr. Vane. My son is not just a child. He is a Vane. His aggression is genetic. And I am not just a nanny," Julian countered, finally turning to meet Dominic's gaze. The impact was physical. Dominic's eyes were a piercing, unnatural gold, the mark of a prime. For a second, Julian felt a wave of dizziness. The scent rolling off Dominic was intoxicating, dark leather, wood smoke, and something dangerously feral. It triggered a primal instinct in Julian, a deep, biological recognition that made his blood run hot. It can't be him, Julian thought, panic fluttering in his throat. The encounter was months ago. It was dark. He was masked, Julian forced himself to breathe. He had taken double the dose of scent suppressants this morning. To Dominic, Julian should smell like nothing more than beta-grade soap. "Prove it," Dominic challenged, crossing his arms. The muscles beneath his suit jacket strained against the fabric. Julian turned back to Leo. The boy was hyperventilating, his small chest heaving. The distress pheromones were spiking again. Julian closed his eyes and focused. He wasn't just calm. He was a null-sensitive omega, a rare variant capable of absorbing and neutralizing aggressive pheromones. It was a tiring, draining gift, but effective. He extended a hand, palm up. Leo, the storm is loud, isn't it? Leo blinked, sniffing the air. The bitterness was fading, replaced by the cool, rainy scent Julian was projecting. It hurts, the boy whispered. I know. Julian soothed, inching forward. Let me be your umbrella. To Dominic's shock, Leo didn't recoil. He crawled forward, over the ruin of the room, and collapsed into Julian's arms, burying his face in Julian's woolen sweater. The sobbing stopped. The oppressive atmosphere in the room lifted instantly, leaving only the sound of the city rain tapping against the panoramic windows. Dominic stared. He had spent millions on therapists, doctors, and beta blockers. And here was this slender young man with fraying cuffs and scuffed shoes, taming the storm with a hug. Dominic felt a dangerous emotion coil in his gut. It wasn't relief. It was possession. You're hired, Dominic said, his voice rough. But if you ever hurt him, I will dismantle your life piece by piece. Understood, Julian whispered, rocking the sleeping boy. But his heart hammered against his ribs. He was safe for now, but he was living in the lion's den, carrying a secret that could get him killed. Chapter 2. The Scent of a Lie. 3 weeks passed. The Vane penthouse began to change. The blinds were opened more often. Fresh flowers appeared on the marble counters. Leo, who had previously refused to speak to anyone but his father, was now shadowing Julian everywhere, holding the hem of his sweater. However, the peace was fragile. Dominic was always watching. Dominic worked from home more frequently. He would sit in his glass-walled office, ostensibly reviewing mergers, but his golden gaze followed Julian. He was suspicious. Julian's background check was too clean. No history of employment in high-end care, no record of his specialized ability. Just a void where the last year of his life should be. And then there was the smell. Dominic prided himself on his senses. He could smell fear on a board member from across a conference table. But Julian? Julian smelled of static. It was the scent of heavy-duty suppressants. Why would a domestic worker need to mask their scent so aggressively in a private home? It came to a head on a stormy Tuesday. Leo was napping, and Julian was in the kitchen, preparing a herbal tea to settle his stomach. The morning sickness was getting worse, the nausea hitting him in violent waves. He gripped the granite countertop, breathing through his nose, praying the dizziness would pass. You're pale. Julian jumped, spinning around. Dominic was leaning against the doorframe, a glass of amber whiskey in his hand. He had discarded his jacket, his tie loosened, revealing the column of his throat. He looked devastatingly weary and dangerously attractive. Just a headache, sir, Julian lied, forcing a smile. Dominic walked closer, invading Julian's personal space. The kitchen was spacious, but suddenly it felt like a closet. Dominic placed his hands on the counter on either side of Julian, trapping him. You don't eat, Dominic observed, his voice low. You take breaks at odd hours. You flinch when I enter the room. What are you hiding, Julian? I'm not hiding anything, Julian stammered, his pulse racing. If Dominic got too close, if the suppressants failed, everyone hides something. I have enemies, Julian. Powerful ones. If you are a plant, if you are working for the Corsetti family. Dominic leaned down, his nose grazing Julian's neck. He inhaled deeply. Julian froze. Dominic paused. He frowned. Beneath the chemical tang of the suppressants, there was something faint, sweet, milky, and familiar. A scent memory tugged at the back of Dominic's mind. A haze of a masquerade gala, a heat-induced fever, a masked Omega with skin like silk who had vanished before dawn. Sir, please, Julian gasped, pushing against Dominic's chest. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through both of them. Dominic pulled back abruptly, confused by his own reaction. His alpha instincts were screaming at him to protect, to claim, but his logic was screaming threat. Go to bed, Dominic ordered harshly, turning away to hide the flush rising on his neck. And Julian? If I find out you're lying to me, the contract won't save you. Julian fled to his quarters, locking the door. He slid down against the wood, trembling. He touched his stomach. We have to leave, he whispered to the darkness. Before he knows. But he couldn't leave. Leo needed him. And, terrifyingly, Julian was realizing he needed them too. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The inevitable crisis arrived a week later, not from within the house, but from the outside. It was the night of the Vane Charity Gala. Dominic had insisted Julian attend to watch over Leo, who was making his first public appearance in years. The ballroom was a sea of velvet and diamonds, the air thick with the perfumes of the city's elite. Julian stood in the shadows of a pillar, dressed in a borrowed tuxedo that fit him a little too snugly around the waist. He felt exposed. Leo was holding Dominic's hand near the stage, looking terrified but holding it together. Then, the lights cut out. Panic rippled through the crowd. Emergency lights flickered red. In the confusion, men in tactical gear smashed through the terrace doors. The Corsetti family had made their move. "Grab the boy," a voice shouted. Dominic roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, throwing a table aside to create a barricade. But he was cut off by 3 attackers. Julian didn't think. He moved. Adrenaline flooded his system, overriding his fear. He sprinted through the chaos, sliding across the polished floor to reach Leo, just as a masked man reached for the boy's collar. "Get away from him!" Julian screamed. He grabbed a heavy silver candelabra and swung it with all his might. It connected with the attacker's helmet with a sickening crunch. The man went down. Julian scooped Leo up, shielding the boy's body with his own as gunfire erupted. He scrambled behind the heavy velvet curtains, pressing Leo into the alcove. "Stay quiet, Leo. Close your eyes. Count to 10, Julian commanded, his voice shaking. "Julian, you're hurt," Leo whimpered. Julian looked down. A shard of debris had sliced his arm, but that wasn't the problem. The stress. The adrenaline. It was burning through his suppressants. The chemical mask evaporated. Suddenly, the scent exploded into the small space. Not just mint and rain anymore. It was the rich, undeniable scent of a pregnant omega, blooming magnolia, warm milk, and the unique, distinct underlying musk of the sire. A shadow fell over them. Dominic stood there, his suit torn, blood on his knuckles. He had decimated the attackers, but now he looked like a man possessed. He ripped the curtain aside, ready to kill the intruder. He froze. He stared at Julian, who was curled around his son, bleeding and panting. The smell hit Dominic like a physical blow. The magnolia, the milk, and beneath it, his scent, the scent of Vane blood. The realization washed over Dominic's face, transforming rage into absolute shock. The masquerade. The one night he had lost control. The mystery omega he had searched for but never found because the name on the guest list had been fake. "You," Dominic breathed, the gun slipping from his hand. "It was you." Julian looked up, tears streaming down his face, clutching his stomach protectively. I didn't know it was you until the interview. I swear." Dominic fell to his knees. The ruthless alpha, the viper of the business world, ignored the wailing sirens of the approaching police. He ignored his security team swarming the room. He reached out, his hand trembling, and hovered it over Julian's stomach. "Mine?" Dominic asked, his voice breaking. Julian nodded, a sob escaping his throat. "Yours." Dominic looked at Leo, who was clinging to Julian, and then at Julian's belly. A guttural sound left his throat, half laugh, half sob. He pulled them both into his arms, crushing them against his chest. The power of his embrace was overwhelming, a shield of iron and heat. "I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch either of you again," Dominic swore into Julian's hair. Chapter 4. The Alpha's Atonement. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, private doctors, and locked gates. Dominic moved them to his private island estate that very night. He didn't trust the city anymore. The dynamic shifted overnight. Julian was no longer the employee. He was the center of Dominic's universe. The ruthless CEO became unbearable in his attentiveness. He wouldn't let Julian walk upstairs. He hired a personal chef to cater to Julian's cravings. He managed Vane Enterprises via video call, often with one hand resting possessively on Julian's knee, out of frame. But the trauma lingered. Julian was terrified that Dominic only wanted the child. That once the baby was born, Julian would be cast aside, paid off like a nuisance. 2 weeks later, they sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Leo was playing in the sand below, guarded by 4 security operatives. "Why didn't you tell me?" Dominic asked, breaking the silence. He was peeling an orange for Julian, his large, dangerous hands moving with surprising delicacy. Because you're Dominic Vane, Julian said quietly. You take things. I didn't want my baby to be an acquisition. Dominic flinched. He handed Julian a slice of fruit, his expression pained. Is that what you think this is? An acquisition, isn't it? We are fated pairs, Dominic. Biology dictates you want me. Genetics dictates you want the heir. Where does love fit into a spreadsheet? Dominic stood up, blocking the sun. He looked down at Julian, his golden eyes intense. Biology brought us together. The child is a miracle. But that night, even through the haze, I remembered your kindness. I remembered that you didn't fear me when everyone else did. He knelt, placing his hands on the armrests of Julian's chair, trapping him, but this time the gesture was pleading, not threatening. I watched you tame my son when I was powerless to help him. I watched you bleed to protect him when you owed us nothing. That isn't biology, Julian. That is character. Dominic leaned in, his forehead resting against Julian's. I am a man who has forgotten how to be gentle. But for you, I am learning. I am not keeping you because of the baby. I am keeping you because you are the only peace I have ever known. Julian searched Dominic's face for any sign of deception. He found only raw, terrifying vulnerability. The walls Julian had built, the fear, the debt, the insecurity, began to crumble. He reached out, his fingers tracing the sharp line of Dominic's jaw. You're still arrogant, Julian whispered, a small smile touching his lips. I'm an alpha, Dominic smirked, turning his head to kiss Julian's palm. It comes with the territory. Then you have a lot of work to do, Mr. Vane. Dominic, he corrected, leaning in to capture Julian's lips in a kiss that tasted of salt air and promises. Call me Dominic. Below them, on the beach, Leo laughed, a true, bright sound that carried on the wind. The storm had passed. The Vane legacy was no longer one of cold isolation, but of a chaotic, fierce, and unbreakable love. And that is how the calm finally tamed the storm. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the mighty alpha to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you have hidden the pregnancy from a man as dangerous as Dominic, or would you have risked telling the truth? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, Yaoi, man 1. Tall alpha, sharp jawline, golden eyes, slicked back black hair, wearing torn expensive tuxedo, protective stance, kneeling, emotional expression. Man 2. Smaller omega, messy brown hair, wearing oversized sweater, sitting on floor, hand on slightly rounded stomach, looking up with teary eyes. Child, small boy, 5 years old, clinging to man 2, hiding face. Background is shattered luxury ballroom, broken glass on floor, velvet curtains, dramatic cinematic lighting, floating dust motes, emotional atmosphere, sharp focus, intricate details.